Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to episode 12. And it's been 5 months. I'm so stoked today and so grateful, so appreciative because we have Benebell Wen. Benebell, welcome.
Hi, Josh. I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, and everything happened so spontaneously in such a short space of time over the full moon, before, during, and after. So I'm very grateful for and very humbled by this opportunity. So first of all, I would just do a brief introduction. So Benebell Wen is known, very well known in the tarot communities in the last decade or so. Author of Holistic Tarot, which came out in 2015, but was completed several years before. And also the Tao of Craft, which came out in 2016, North Atlantic Books. So author of 2 books. At the same time, also by profession in law, and also the illustrator of Spirit Keepers Tarot, now running in the 3rd edition. So anything else I missed from this beautiful introduction?
I don't think so. Thank you so much.
So yes, really nice to have you, Benebell. It's Sunday morning for you in California. Um, so Benebell, how has your full moon weekend been going?
A lot of writing. It's been pretty productive. So I've been talking about how I'm trying to work on fiction now. That's kind of my next phase in life. So yeah, it's been pretty busy here.
And I've also realized, many of us have realized through your Instagram and your updates, your blogs, and so on and so forth, you are starting to pack and deliver SKT3, Spirit Keepers Tarot Edition 3. So has it been overwhelming so far?
Right now, it's actually more nerve-wracking because we just the production is done over in Shenzhen, China, and now they're getting ready to ship overseas to us. It's a 45 to 50-day process, and it's just nerve-wracking because you don't know whether or not the quality assurance went well. There's just so many things that can happen in 50 days. So right now, I'm more nervous and anxious than anything else.
And for those who are tuning in, Benebell has a social media presence. You can go to benebellwen.com. You can find her on YouTube, Instagram with the same name, Benebell Wen, and I will include links on the YouTube profile as well once we're finished. So yeah, so Benebell, now with the 3rd edition, of your deck, you've gone through the sepia toned and the Vitruvian, and now it's Revelations. So would you like to briefly share with us about the processes you have been going through, the epiphanies, the intuitions, the different kinds of transformations during this period of time for the 3 editions?
I think the intention that I went in for each of the editions was pretty different or distinct. With the first edition, I really did not want it to be, I didn't think it was going to be published. When I started drawing, the first time I put ink to pen, it was 100% hand drawn. It was going to be a physical copy of a deck, like one hand drawn physical copy of a deck, just one for myself to use as a personal working deck, right? That was the idea and the concept behind it. So when it's something for you, I don't think about, oh, what does Josh think of tarot? What does this have? Like, it's all about me. It's me, right? And so it was a very different angle going into the tarot. I didn't think about marketability. I didn't think about commercial, like nothing. It was just what I wanted to do. Halfway through it, after I finished the major arcana, my husband saw some of the cards and he's like, these are kind of good, right? These are pretty good. You should do something with this. And so then that was when I started thinking a little bit more about marketability. But it was all hand drawn. And then the Vitruvian edition, I made a couple of changes to make it a little bit more accessible to other people rather than being just a 100% Benebell deck, right? Trying to make it a little bit more accessible, not so specifically personal, to my point of view. And then with the 3rd edition, the Revelation, I really expanded in terms of my, just in terms of art technique, right? It became very expansive. I really went in full force learning art rather than just being an amateur artist. I wanted to study art, take art very, very seriously. I learned digital art, so I added digital art and hybridized that with the hand-drawn illustrations. So the full color third edition, it was very much about me trying to connect to the collective. So it was me, it is still my point of view. Every single tarot deck is the creator's point of view. There's no getting around that. That's just kind of a defined requirement. But beyond that, I try to think about the collective and how to express something a little bit more universal. Whereas with the first edition, I didn't do that at all. It was about expressing my point of view, full stop.
That's the wonder I've found, I mean, through your writings, your publishings, and so on and so forth, your videos. And, for those people who are tuning in and not as familiar or even familiar to some level, Benebell has a ton of resources on the website. You have put in so much previews and worksheets and so on and so forth, so many resources on various aspects of tarot, from the history to even some of the card meanings. And it's really a very generous to the world, a generous education and sharing, and very well researched. And I dare say, having looked into tarot for about a decade myself, also growing up on the classics, looking at a lot of, I know someone you like to reference a lot, Levi, Eliphas Levi. Yeah, looking to Levi and, the classical Golden Dawn and Thoth traditions and so on and so forth, even the Marseille before that. I think Benebell has done, I've looked through many different authors, and a lot of people are doing a lot of great work. Everyone's unique in their own way. However, how I feel is, you have put out a very interesting synthesis, multicultural, universal synthesis. Maybe we can get some insight into that, maybe either through your background or maybe the way you were brought up, or even the way you have approached tarot is very inclusive and at the same time is very universal. The most important thing, also understanding the various traditions of the Marseille and the Golden Dawn and the Thoth and so on and so forth. Very, very, widely spread traditions, especially the weight tradition that within the Golden Dawn. It's almost in, I don't know, 80-95% of the decks or so on and so forth. So that's one thing. You have paid homage to the great various lineages, so on and so forth, but at the same time bringing something really, really new to the table, which has kind of reinterpreted it in a very vast way. So I think that is something I would like to also thank you being an influence for me during my tarot revival since recently.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm very humbled by that. You've made me speechless. I don't know how to respond to that.
Yes. So in regards to something I've mentioned briefly there also, like, would you like to share a bit more about the background, maybe where you've come from really quick, and also your upbringing in regards to how you have viewed tarot and allowed yourself to expand from the traditions as well?
I think it's both intentional and organized from a very academic standpoint, but it's also very organic in terms of whatever is the step that's being offered in front of me, I take the step there. So it's very small, baby step. And so I think after this many years, when you look at it in one instant as an observer, it looks organized. It looks like I was very intentional, but that's far, far from the case. I wasn't intentional at all. When I was taking every single baby step, I had no idea what the next step would be. So for example, when a friend of mine in junior high gifted me with a tarot deck, and we're using the tarot to do fortune telling and looking up every single card in the book. Does he like me? Will I get an A in science class? Like, that was our deep way of using the tarot. I didn't know that at some point I would get into the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. We were using one of those decks you buy at the local Barnes and Noble, right? One of those commercial decks. And so I didn't know I was going to get into the Waite-Smith deck. And then from there, I didn't know I was going to be interested in the Thoth deck. I didn't know I was going to be interested in Crowley, especially since if you think about the environment in the early 90s, it was Waite good, Crowley bad. Stay away from Crowley, Thoth deck evil. So if you're raised, like if that is sort of what you're being told, you're going to be like, oh, okay, stay away from Crowley, Crowley evil, Thoth deck bad, right? And so I would never have predicted. I would be more interested in that and really get into, just read from his words, read his writings, and try to assess and discern for yourself whether or not this is evil or not, right? And then from there you get into the Golden Dawn and a lot of the, at least the accessible texts, the texts that were published later on, Israel Regardie, right? And then who they all paid homage to, Eliphas Levi. So you're like, who is this Eliphas Levi? Well, why is everybody talking about him? And Tankoji Bolang, why is everyone talking about him? So it's like one step at a time. But if you ask me, did I predict all of that? Did I map out my studies? No, absolutely not. It's, you read one thing, this person makes reference to something else, and you're curious. So you continue on and on and on. In terms of the marriage between more Eastern esoteric traditions with the tarot, that's just because I'm Asian American. I was raised in Eastern Taoist and Buddhist esoteric traditions. I was not raised at all in anything Western or tarot related. And so, of course, I'm going to bring that into the tarot. Everybody brings their background into the tarot, which is why some people are into more Catholic traditions and, and marrying Catholic traditions with the tarot, right? You bring your world into the tarot and merge it with that. So that's kind of where I came from, why it looks like I bring a lot of Eastern tradition into tarot. That's almost natural, right? That part is predictable.
Definitely, and it's an approach I myself, and I'm sure several people out there are also doing, whether they're publishing or whether they're just solitary practitioners or readers. And I think it's one of the ways to not be stuck, with what everyone else has been doing. Not that it's good or bad or anything, but especially with this episode, we're trying to see how we can add more self-awareness, mindfulness, and transformative aspects of the tarot. Because the long title for the book you release, Holistic Tarot, is actually called an integrative approach to using tarot for personal growth. So, which will be the basis of what we are sharing today, and personal growth and also spiritual development. Because both you and I, and I'm sure many people have started out with some of these questions and about forecasting about the future, the divination aspect, the fortune telling. However, those are cool. It works. However, if we are not really utilizing the infinite potential, the highest potentiality, infinite potentiality of this technology, it's so, and it can liberate us from so many patterns, like patterns, behavioral patterns, mental patterns, and also basically a form of a new leash of life each day. So we are going to go into this aspect. So for example, are there any without the tarot and so on and so forth, what are your religious spiritual inclinations, like your practices and all that? Anything you would like to share which might be useful for the viewer?
I would definitely say I'm Buddhist. It looks like Buddhism. It acts like it's very, like, quacks like a duck, looks like a duck. It's very, very much the religion I was raised with. My mom was very much a practitioner of folk. We say folk magic, but it's weird because if you're actually a native East Asian, we don't necessarily use the word folk magic, even in translation. So it's awkward for me to say she practices folk magic because she would never use those words. She would never say I practice shamanism. She would never say I practice a form of mediumship. You just do. It just is. I can't explain it. It just is. It's baked into your lifestyle. And so I would never have to sit here and have a conversation with you about how I eat and how I breathe air. It's just something that you do. And so it's in the Western, influence from the age of reason and enlightenment, where we're so much focused on the sciences and rationalism, that if you are speaking on anything that is not in the realm of rationalism and science, you have to put a name or a label to it: witchcraft, folk magic, fortune telling. So that's where these labels come from. And that's why I use those labels only as a term of convenience. But in my actual world, we don't use those terms. So it is Buddhism and religion. But then because we believe there is this unseen counterpart of energy, some form of psychic energy, chi, some life force that you can have access to, In the same way I can physically hold objects in my hand, I can psychically work with the energy around me. So that's a practice. That's something that I do. And so it's kind of like exercise. I have certain physical exercises, rituals, and I also have a particular religion. So my religious belief is Buddhism. What people then call spiritual practices, I don't call it spiritual practices because it's not spiritual to me. It's not, oh, it's just about trying to understand the psychic energy around me, and that's a practice.
Yes, well said. I mean, for myself, also being a fellow Buddhist, it's nice to have a Dharma sister.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Also, it's a very different perspective. I mean, where we are from, our respective backgrounds. At the same time, also having the experience being in a Western countries, having the philosophies and the different, being exposed to different kinds of practices and so on and so forth, ideologies as well. Especially coming from the Eastern traditions, a lot more emphasis, especially from Buddhist, Hindu, Jain tradition, Taoist tradition to some extent, about karma. How there's this cause and effect, there's causality, and we have this amount of accountability, responsibility for our actions and body, speech, and mind, and so on and so forth, which I personally feel some aspects of it are in the Western traditions, in the tarot, but traditionally not very well emphasized or well, I would say, contemplated as much as the refinement in India and China for, wow, thousands of 2,000 years now, 2,500 years. So I think that's something very interesting. I think you have brought with this integrative approach, and some other people as well. But I think you have done it really well, because your book has over 800 pages and it covers so many aspects about the history, very well researched, and also at the same time covering the superstition. And you also have the different systems, which the user or the tarot practitioner or reader and so on and so forth, they can engage. There's no biasness in that sense. You put it in a very open format. And there's also contemplations, there's also meditative practices. So I think it's a very well-rounded book. So in that respects, I would like to ask also, what qualities, in your opinion, or what makes and constitute an all-rounded tarot reader or practitioner? What are some of the qualities?
Wow. I think it's somebody who does not think they're always right. And I know that's so cliche and simple, but I think it's somebody who is open-minded to integrating paths that are unfamiliar. When you are open to bringing in things that are not what you grew up with, something that you're not raised with, but at the same time, almost in a contradictory way, bringing in an unabashed way your own knowledge. I think a lot of people, one of the things that limits people is they think there is a right and a wrong way to approach the tarot. And if the dominant or the majority view of how to read tarot is different from their own personal experiences, their personal worldview, they will shut down their personal worldview and adopt in almost a very dogmatic way what the majority view is. And then you'll see this, they harp it, they almost preach the majority way and silence their personal perspective. And I think that's extremely self-limiting. And there's really no way to break out of, a very materialistic approach to the tarot if that's how you do it. At the same time, not only do you have to bring yourself, you still have to be open-minded to what other perspectives are. And so another thing that I see is, if I believe that the tarot represents, it's kind of like acupuncture. It is 78 points that are expressive of the unit circle, the whole of the compendium, the whole of the world. It's the acupunctural points of the universe, in a sense, right? Then it has to, like by requirement, it has to be able to reconcile with many of the other systems. So every single esoteric system that humankind has been able to conceive of, if true, if they are true, will be able to reconcile with each other, just like everything can be reduced to a common denominator. There's a form of mathematics, there's a science to it. So I think if you truly want to be a holistic tarot reader, you will zealously pursue the reconciliation of all these different systems to get to some kind of a core truth. The irony there, however, is that that core truth is a personal gnosis, and it's dependent on the position of the observer. So it's completely contingent on the observer, meaning the core truth, the gnosis that you arrive at when you have reconciled all the systems as Josh, will be very different from mine, and both are true at the same time. So that's kind of that's the paradox, right?
Yeah, that's the the tricky aspect of the reconciliation. Yeah, so you've mentioned some interesting qualities there. I would like also to add, from my perspective, the study is very important. I think that's something which I've noticed lacking, amongst quite a significant number of practitioners. Some stick to the little white book, which is fine, the LWB, and at the same time, not really very well versed with some of the major traditions. Because I think if we are giving readings for other people, or even using it for our own development or our own leisure, and so on and so forth, it would be to give this little push to ourselves to actually to take the time to research, which I think you've mentioned you spend countless number of hours and days in libraries and so on and so forth. And nowadays, a lot of things can be found online. There are a lot of beautiful books you can get, resources. So besides this, there was another thing also. So besides the study and all this, there's also the ethical thing, whether we are integrating it in a way where there's a form of morality, a kind of ethical discipline we are doing. Because if we are going to take it to the next level of being holistic practitioners, I think having a good moral discipline or ethical sensibility is really important. What do you think about the ethical aspect of moral discipline?
I think I mean, there's a political question here as well. And the reason I say political is because the profession of tarot is unregulated. And because it's an unregulated profession, there's a lot of conversations immediately we cannot have. Like my husband, James, tomorrow can become a professional tarot reader, create a website, James, a professional tarot reader, and start reading for the public. I mean, there's no stopping anybody from doing it. It's not like other professions, being a doctor, being a lawyer, being an accountant, even being an engineer, being a mechanic. For someone to build your house, they need to have like a crazy amount of licensing to build your house, right? And so when it's regulated by some kind of an institutionalized body, then you can start having these conversations about ethical rules. Ethics is a subject matter within the umbrella of an institutionalized oversight of a particular path, right? Morality is more in the realm of religion, spirituality. It's a personal choice. And so because we are an unregulated profession, we are no longer talking about ethics. You can have these conversations about ethics for fun, but ultimately the reality, the harsh truth is there is no ethics because there's no oversight, no governing body. But we have morality. Morals is something that an individual tarot reader would have to think about. And so it's necessarily tied then to religion, right? So if it's ethics, it's not tied to religion. It's tied to politics. It's tied to oversight. It's tied to its institution. If we're talking about morals, it's tied to, you can even use the word spiritual beliefs. If people are uncomfortable with the word religion, which I think is still the same thing as spiritual beliefs, right? Bringing in that, but then that becomes something that's very, very personal and it's unregulated. That's something that we can have educational materials out there. Tarot readers who have some kind of an influence, who have some kind of a platform or presence, may have arguably a personal social responsibility to advocate for moral behavior in the tarot profession. But the ethics, unfortunately, we don't have that oversight. And that's a conversation, that's a political conversation that tarot readers can definitely debate.
Yes, definitely. I think the unregulation, which you mentioned, it's also throughout various traditions at the same time, and the earlier authors and so on and so forth, creators of the decks, even until now. So, but it's also at the same time, there were certain things I think you've mentioned also very important, which we also should take note that at the same time, in terms of legal services or medical, in terms of medical expertise, or even psychologists, psychological help, like we should also, if you are doing readings for other people, we should also at least inform them that, this shouldn't be substituted for those three things, medical, legal, and psychological. However, at the same time also, you've mentioned how it's a very interesting diagnostic tool, psychoanalysis. So it could be used in that aspect. So I think this aspect of the, maybe for the lack of better word, the ethical aspect in terms of being accountable, because we are sharing this space and providing a sort of, whether it's advice or a certain kind of way of looking at perspective, is something we can share with the readers.
I think in terms of my sort of what I would say in response to that is, I think it's complicated. I have personally very judgmental and closed-minded views about the morality of professional tarot readers, right? Like they're very, very judgmental. But then as soon as I have those judgmental thoughts, I also understand that I cannot control what the profession looks like. I can't control what the community does. I can't control the collective. And so for me to put my judgment out there, if I want to express that closed-minded judgment when I have no control over it, is that beneficial? Does that produce some form of measurable benefit to the collective if I put forth that judgment? Or is more benefit yielded if I withhold that judgment? And that's a determination you do have to make, right? And so I think, given where we are in terms of what I see of the collective, there's no benefit in putting forth a closed-minded judgment of that collective at this time, right?
Yeah, definitely. At the same time, also, as we continue this conversation, so we've covered a bit about the study aspect, which I will go back to a bit. I find it very useful, and I think perhaps even in your works you have included a plethora of the multidisciplinary approach of tarot. And I think it's also to encourage people who are interested in tarot, or people who are already intermediate and advanced practitioners as well, however they may be. There are many different realms, different dimensions, layers of the tarot, and it would also allow us to understand the cards and the synthesis of the cards when we look at it from different perspectives and different disciplines, some of them being mythological, elemental, with numerology and astrology and psychology at the same time. Especially Jungian approaches has been quite popular in recent years, recent decades. So I think as well, which you have included the universal aspect. When I say universal, in the sense of multicultural, because the texts you have and the books and even some of the ideas you're putting in come from different cultures, different religious and esoteric traditions around the world. And it also gives a more vast worldview that, hey, we always think more about self and self-beliefs, but there's so-called something known as the other, and we've seen a lot of this, some kind of a narrow way of how tarot has been mainly represented in certain things, which is, there's no right or wrong, as we have been mentioning, the unregulation of it. But now being 2021 and so on and so forth, with the age of the internet and education and globalization and multiculturalism, it's important to have these discussions, or rather this kind of inclusivity, because of the diversity we have. It's a kind of a university, unity in diversity in what sorts. So that's something I appreciate in your works, which I find as kind of differentiated some of your works in a more the transcendent aspect, in a more vast aspect, which has influenced my way of approaching things as well. So that is a very interesting point I would like to also share. One of the questions I have here also, let's say if we increase, as we increase working with the tarot, sometimes some of the byproducts, psychic awareness increases, maybe mindfulness, depending on the practitioner and their awareness. How would we springboard from this, right? With mindfulness and self-awareness, right? How would we springboard from this basis to use tarot in a way which is more towards purifying, purification and transformation as a form of a tool of liberation? How do we actually springboard? What are some of your thoughts?
I think, so for example, I'm not actually against fortune telling. I think fortune telling is a very necessary first step, especially if there's a lot of lack. If there's a lot of lacking in your life and there's a lot of sense of helplessness or disempowerment. And I think that's another thing that comes from my heritage, where my grandparents were impoverished. And so they were fortune tellers, because if you don't have access to healthcare and you don't have access to wealth building, and there's really no realistic way for you to earn money, like these are really important survival skills, trying to almost desperately reach into something that you do have some control of if you are a psychic or fortune teller or medium, something that you have some abilities in, and really optimize that ability to bring something of physical materialistic benefit to your family. And so I think that very easy first step is a form of fortune telling, to wealth build, to put yourself in a place of material security. Once you're in a position of material security, then you can start thinking about, what am I doing to benefit society? What am I doing to sort of deepen my relationship with the world, my relationship with the divine? And then that's when we can start having those conversations. And so I think it's a step-by-step process. In terms of the tarot, again, it goes back to, if you have to first presume that it articulates a universal truth. So if you believe that it articulates a universal truth, then every step that you take is toward trying to study or unpack or reveal what that truth is. And so everybody's path is going to be a little bit different, right? So for me, I am very interested in Buddhism. And so I do kind of have that oversight of belief in karma, belief in a lot of the Buddhist principles that will govern and guide the way I approach the tarot. If you're Roman Catholic, if you're Muslim, it doesn't matter. It's going to take that that principle will guide your path with the tarot. And so I believe tarot is a universal truth, some form of a metaphysical science that can be paired with any religion, any philosophical belief. And that's the reason I think it pairs so well with psychology, psychoanalysis, especially Jungian archetypes, is because it pairs with anything, right? And so you find what it pairs with and you take that path.
Definitely. And also, what I'd like to add to that as well is, as you know, the psychic awareness increases, it's the use of intuition, the use of this kind of clairsentience of some sorts, and even with the reading, a kind of a clairvoyance. So when we have these things, at the same time, what I feel I found beneficial for myself, and I think some of the readers have found as well, it's a kind of a balance. It's like a temperance card. So you have one foot in the water, one foot on the on land, at least in the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition, and so on and so forth. So if we see the waters of intuition, and then if we see a ground of, this kind of stable earth of kind of logic at the same time. So I think as we look at spiritual development, or we want to call it holistic well-being or personal self-growth, whichever terms we want to see, not to also to have a kind of a middle way, a balance, because sometimes, yes, intuition can come in certain ways, which are, almost it's almost unpredictable. At the same time, to use the common sense and practicality, but then again, the term common sense, right? So our increase of sharpness of perception, cognition, is something I think even after 4 months of doing tarot or 40 years, it's a constant sense of refining. That's what keeps us going. It's not like, okay, I'm here, I'm complacent, this is how much I charge for tarot, and there's no more learning, right? So I think this kind of complacency, where if we get stuck, it's very, very dangerous. At the same time, if we see things from a certain one angle of view without breaking up and seeing, because different people we're going to do tarot for, if we are doing readings, would be different kinds of personality and elemental compositions, and different kinds of karmic attributions and characteristics. So there's a plethora of different diversities we are facing, and if we are able to connect with the languages of in a sense of what the person actually needs, like skillful means, knowing what actually would be beneficial for the person, rather than if I know someone's not going to be into Kabbalistic attributions and I'm going to talk about the Sefer Yetzirah and the different paths and all that, how useful would that be, that kind of thing. So there's this kind of over intellectualization we should also watch.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think when you're talking about the temperance card, that 1 foot in the water, 1 foot on land, I love that. I think that is sort of the approach of the tarot reader. When we say why do you have to be compassionate? I think compassion is the precondition to clairvoyance, clairsentience, and psychic ability. You really need to be able to understand the suffering of people in order to have to have that psychic connection to people is tethered to compassion, right? The two go hand in hand. And so compassion is the gateway into being able to understand the plight of people. Understanding suffering on that universal level is deeply philosophical and intangible and esoteric. But then feeling the pain and suffering of people is very earthly and materialistic. And so it's that balance that I think every tarot reader needs to be able to negotiate to be a good tarot reader,
Nice. Yeah, that was a lovely presentation about that, which I truly agree, the idea of compassion and selflessness. So there's also like a little example I like to show, which also will lead into selflessness. Just a very short, I wouldn't even say it's a guided meditation. It's just one of the techniques earlier when I was meditating. It's someone came to me. It came from a certain particular Buddhist text, but because for the benefit of the viewer, I try to put it in a more secular way. So for example, if we take all the fours, okay, the minor cards of the fours, we have very nice cards here of the fours. I think we have all of them here. So let's say if we go by the elements, okay, so if we are using the order of having earth first. So if we have the earth element first, we have this. So I think one of the tarot meditations we can do, if we take out the 4 cards, right, of the pip cards of all number 4s of the minor arcana, we can, this also pentacles representing, more of like the physical, we take in a sense of physical body, right? One of the attributions, one of the many attributions. So a kind of a meditation, if we're going to tarot meditations, we can also, this can also be a reminder in our meditative practices to also kind of meditate on the body, whether it's a certain area which has tension, a certain area which has certain blocks. We can either use certain kind of breathing techniques. These are some of the techniques you have mentioned also about breathing in your book. So these are some of the things we can look at. A meditation on the body, that's on a very general level. Later I will also share some more subtle level. And after we go with the meditation of the body, we can also try to meditate on our feelings, if we are looking at cups. And also this is also interesting card to also see a kind of a, is this going to apathy or are we going into meditation of feelings and so on and so forth? Really depends on the reading, but this is also a very interesting card which can see to meditate on sensation and feelings. And then if we go into kind of meditation on our thoughts, the arising and cessation of thoughts, represented by swords and air, that's why I like the force as well, the kind of a stability of the square in Pythagorean shapes and forms. And then, wands was something I was thinking about, but since the 4th level is actually meditation on phenomena, so we could say, in some of the traditions, we're talking about fire, whether it's a divine fire, the secret fire or whatnot, it's almost like whether we're speaking about a vital life force, the dynamic vital life force, so like fiery. So to meditate also on the phenomena and selflessness at the same time. So I think this, the 4s would be very interesting. I think the 7s as well, also in terms of assessment and philosophical inquiry of self-reflecting. Meditations on the tarot. So it's also not just in a sense, at least how I would see, or seen some readers have done, it's like, okay, we do a reading, it's like, okay, we need to this and that. But also if we're using it for our transformation, to also look into different disciplines, whether it's in Tai Chi or yoga, or even Kabbalistic meditations or Christian meditations, or even mindfulness meditation now, which is so secularized as well. to see how we can use these techniques. The tarot is kind of an unconscious to conscious way in some sense to also remind us there are all these different techniques we can actually use, in order to have holistic well-being, a sense of compassion, a sense of wisdom. So I think putting this into integrating this holistically, I think was where, I was kind of shifting into about some of the practices. I wouldn't even call it like practices. After some time, it's like almost natural things, not like something formal I have to do, even though you can start off like that. But this is something I'd like to share with the viewers more also about the meditations on the cards and elements as well.
That's actually it sounds like there's a lot of influence from the Golden Dawn there when you talk about using the tarot for meditations, or Boda, the builders of the Adadam. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's really interesting because from a very young age, when I was just playing with the tarot cards, you did hear from the Golden Dawn traditions. Oh, you need to create your own tarot deck, right? Or at least color, take the black and white version of a deck and color it in, and understand the psychic meditation behind color correspondences. And I think I have many thoughts on that. For me, it absolutely worked, and I feel like that was a form of holistic approach to the tarot, because in doing so, you had no choice but to integrate and combine many different disciplines at the same time in order to create this work product. So you had no choice but to think about astrology and think about color and think even about human behavior and body mannerisms. There's so many things you had to think about as a requirement in order to create your own tarot deck or to color in a tarot deck. But then at the same time, I also don't want to say that that's something that everybody has to do, right? I would never want to say that either. So then I have to ask myself, if I'm saying you don't have to create your own tarot deck or color in a tarot deck to have this holistic relationship with the tarot, then what is an alternative to that? What are other approaches? I think the other approach is to, at some future point of your path with the tarot, is to do tarot without the tarot. And I think it's to be able to visualize all 78 cards of any deck. I don't care which deck it is, but whichever deck it is that you found some personal connection to after you have achieved that attunement, which does require study and work. So you need to have physically worked with one deck enough that you can visualize every single card from that deck in your mind just by prompting, whether that's a deck you've created yourself or it's the Rider-Waite, the Tarot de Marseille, doesn't matter, some deck. And at that point, I can't tell you how to do it because that's something that's deeply personal, but to work with the tarot on that visualized level. And I think the easy next step is, of course, tarot meditation, astral journeying of some kind, some form of path working with the tarot is the sort of easy solution to that. But the requirement would be to have a spiritual deck in your mind and work with that at some developed point in your studies with the tarot.
Brilliant. Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's the Golden Dawn aspect, especially with the Paul Foster case on tarot meditations. The sequence I went in more for body, feeling, mental consciousness and phenomena was also taken from a Buddhist text called the Satipatthana Sutra, or the Establishing Mindfulness. So it was this kind of a synthesis, right? There's a kind of tradition. Okay, this is a kind of a root, which has relevance. Let's say if I'm using the Rider-Waite tradition and Rider-Waite Smith, and then at the same time there's some of this Eastern introspective techniques which could work towards certain kinds of ways we can deal with the world, and within ourselves as well, the world. And then there was this little thing I was trying to play with earlier as well. I think a few hours before this, I was so inspired, you having to agree here. I took the major arcana, all right, 0 to 21. And I was thinking, okay, we have this, instead of just talking about contemplation and meditation at the same time, there's also the emphasis on things which could seem as the more physical to psychophysical as well, like diet and sleep and exercise and so on and so forth. So I was thinking, how can I look at the major arcana and see exercise, or what kind of activities I could do? And then out of the meditation, that came towards one of the end of my yoga sessions earlier. And it just came to me that I just wrote everything down in 5 minutes. And I think this is just my perspective on these things, but it's something I will encourage as well. And I think you have also encouraged about tarot journaling. You know, you have the keywords and you have all these sub keywords, and how do you feel about this card? So even though this is a work in progress for the last like 3 hours, which I came out with, I think, yeah, everyone, you know, there's no rules in a sense of how we can actually explore the different depths according to our current consciousness, our current feeling, and so on and so forth. So maybe if I can share a little bit, maybe you choose three of your three cards which come to you from Major Arcana. I can share with you what I've wrote in terms of the exercise or activity.
All right. The Hierophant.
The Hierophant. That was okay. Hierophant, Star.
And I'll go Temperance.
Temperance. Okay.
Yeah. So Hierophant, Temperance, and Star.
Yeah. Hierophant was a bit difficult for me.
I thought so.
So I kind of thought and pulled in Taurus, fixed Earth. And I came up with the idea of, okay, the strength of the bull, right? Keeping to a certain kind of regime and discipline. So weightlifting, gym.
Yeah.
This is just a work in progress, which I came up with. So that was the Hierophant: weightlifting, gym. So any other, even for yourself or even other viewers at the same time. Yeah, about exercise, not only physical exercise but also spiritual exercises. So then the next card you asked was the Star. Temperance. Okay, so Temperance was a bit different because I put balancing 2 activities. Because of the balance, so I put balancing of 2 activities. So balance, it could be a kind of a form of balance. I don't want to say Pilates or yoga or so on and so forth, because I've included that on another card. But yes, okay, maybe some people think, yeah, if balance, maybe in a sense of, I don't know, something more gymnastic or even just a simple yoga posture. We're just trying to work on our warrior 1 or, warrior poses and so on and so forth. And then the third card you asked?
The Star.
The Star. Okay, so the Star was more towards the classical meaning of meditation. But I would like to also say the Star and the Moon. I mean, you can look at those things in some way, because there's a lot of water, at least in the Rider-Waite tradition and so on and so forth. So besides the meditation, which also has been mentioned, healing, therapies, massage.
I like that.
Yeah, so I was kind of thinking also, not just based on the symbolism, but also the astrological significances, a bit of the Kabbalistic, because some of the cards, like the Hierophant, was so difficult. So I was kind of thinking, okay, fixed Earth, Taurus, what would that be? And then also, they're not all physical, because, for example, if you look at the Magician and if you look at the High Priestess, what I've actually put here for the Magician, because it's a kind of a directing of energy. So I've kind of put mental exercises. So mental exercises, memorization, concentration, this kind of things, and then since we are looking at the kind of the High Priestess, it was more towards psychic exercises. So you have the mental kind of exercises of memorization, concentration, and then it goes into psychic exercises. So it was something I just, it just came up today, this kind of a meditation, and I've posted a little list here of the exercises and so on and so forth. The Hangman was interesting.
Oh, tell me about the Hangman.
Hangman, okay, so because it corresponds to men, I put swimming. Because also it's kind of a reflection. However, what came to me first was contortion, like yoga.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like Shashasana, headstand.
Sorry,
you're saying something?
No, I wasn't. I was just going to say that this, to me, reinforces why I believe so strongly that there is some kind of a universal truth that is the tarot. The tarot is that common denominator. For some reason, I don't know why. I don't know. The history doesn't make sense because it was playing cards, right? It was just a game. How did this happen? I don't know, and I can't explain that, but I do know what we have now. The number of occultists and great minds that have devoted their work into the tarot and has added their energy to the tarot. And as tarot has evolved over the centuries, for some reason now, like the I Ching, like the Kabbalah, it has evolved into something that does has become a tool, a diagnostics tool for us to arrive at that core truth. And one way that I see that is in things like, for example, what you were saying, being able to correspond, even something like exercising to the tarot. I see, for example, I was going to talk about, it reminded me of someone, I can't remember her name, but she does this thing called Arcana dance, where she uses the major arcana and she choreographs dance with it, and she shows you how to choreograph dance with it. So that's one approach to it. Herb Crafter's Tarot, the deck creator of the Herb Crafter's Tarot, I was in a workshop that she did, and she also talked about actually mimicking the positions that the figures in the tarot card in the deck that you're working with, mimicking those positions in order to try to understand and empathize and reach a point of empathy with that type of energy. Mary Greer talked about that as well. So having so many people echo the same sentiment that you just came up with, it really, to me, validates that there's some truth in it, you know?
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned about choreography, for example, right? Dance moves, so it's kind of this kind of how we are emanating nature, just like how a lot of martial arts and yoga and so on and so forth, we were trying to replicate animals and
Yeah.
different kinds of movements and so on and so forth. So this is the continuing living tradition of, and we are the embodiments of actually making it alive,
Yeah.
So that was some of the things. I mean, you have shared in your works, you have been sharing in your works, and I also wanted to also elucidate on this point that yes, very useful to also be creative, in terms of these things about exercises or even like the major arcana. Okay, what should I do today, right? What kind of exercises? And then you take out, you just, whether it's by choice or whether we have flipped and it's a strength card, maybe strength training. Or if it's the emperor, maybe something more dynamic, maybe martial arts, I do not know,
Yeah.
So like that kind of thing, and also the multicultural aspect, right? Like looking at the hermit, for example, what would the hermit be like in Greece? What would the hermit be like in India? Is it the yogi, for example, the renunciate? And those kind of things, the length of wisdom and all those things, and what would tantric teachings be like, or those kind of things. What would the kundalini yoga be like in the tarot, in those sense? So I think those are really very important synthesis and thesis we can all work with our experiences. I think it's what you are encouraging, and I would also like to put support also for anyone watching to be creative at the same time, to also explore our mind, our body, our feelings, our sensation, and seeing how we can have this. Everyone is unique, have their uniqueness approach, but also to have this kind of borrowed originality, how we replicate from nature, borrowed originality, and how are we actually representing these messages and sharing to other people at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So any last maybe thoughts, advice, suggestions in the sense of the holistic integration of tarot? Or maybe you're going to share a story or something?
Um, I think when it comes to the tarot, like when we were saying what does holistic tarot mean, what's actually funny is it's the book was supposed to be called Tarot Analytics. So when I submitted it to publishing houses, I think it was called Tarot Analytics or Analytical Tarot, and that was what it was supposed to be. It was, I was trying to propose a very specific school of thought, a very specific way of approaching the tarot, not a one size fits all, not, oh, everybody should do tarot. Because I felt like when you're writing a tarot book, right, I felt like there were so many books on the tarot already. What can I possibly say to contribute to the world of tarot? So you always want, as an author, you want to, what's the book that I can write that's very specific to me, right? And so I was like, well, I can bring a very analytical approach to it. So I called it Tarot Analytics. And if you look at the book, it does come from a very analytical approach. The publishing house decided, and they were correct, that a book called Analytical Tarot would probably not sell very well. And so they changed the title to Holistic Tarot. I remember in the beginning when they proposed that, let's call it Holistic Tarot, I was a little bit like, it's not holistic, because from an Eastern perspective, holism is a form of like alternative medicine. There's a form of traditional medicine to it, Ayurvedic, traditional Chinese medicine. And so that's kind of where I was thinking, like, that's the opposite of what I'm doing here. But I think what they mean by holistic is, like you were saying, it's multidisciplinary. And so holistic can also mean multidisciplinary, and that's another approach to it. And so ultimately, I think if you approach it from a multidisciplinary perspective, it is a natural next step to think about how it can be a tool for healing. And when you've already gone through that multidisciplinary approach, and it's thinking about tarot as a way to heal, you will eventually arrive at various cultures, schools of thought on alternative medicine, psychic or spiritual medicine. And so that's how I evolved into, if you look at Spirit Keepers Tarot, the Spirit Keepers Tarot takes a unabashedly different approach to the tarot from Holistic Tarot, the book. The book was very analytical and was like, let's keep it to psychology, let's keep it to a form of systematic science to the tarot, a mental science. And then with SKT, I said, fuck that. We're going to go all in on the spirituality. I don't think the two are different. I think it's the natural advancement after many, many years of studying it from a systematic approach. If you go about something from a very systematic approach, if you think about just Einstein, any kind of science, at some point, you have no more in this world of observable, measured science, in the systematic approaches that you already know. In the known world, there's no more in the known world for you to play with. What can you do? You have to take a leap off that cliff into the unknown. And when you take that leap into the unknown, that's where you get into the spiritual and the intangible. So it's not that the SKT is diametrically different from the holistic tarot approach, the integrative approach. It's that it's the necessary step after many, many years of that, working in the known world. And so SKT is about entering the unknown world, whereas the book was about staying firmly, both feet on the ground in the known world. That was a ramble.
No, it's it's a unique sharing. It's priceless. You don't get this doesn't it doesn't come out often. So I really appreciate that. It's really nice to have the a very spontaneous chat between two old friends, as you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's I just would like to also share the appreciation and gratitude for you to share your energy, effort, time, and space, on a Sunday morning around the full moon. So yes, and for those people who are who have been tuning in and would like to check out some of our work, Benebell has written 2 books, Holistic Tarot and The Tao of the Craft. And you can also visit the website, Benebell Wen, and also Instagram. Spirit Keepers Tarot is coming, it's already been packed, the 3rd edition. So you can find those information on the Instagram, on the website, on a blog. There are many personal entries, tarot notations on the website. There's so many plethora of resources, multicultural, insightful, at the same time, very well researched. So I really encourage, to extract some of this inspiration and actually to also forge our identities as we transform ourselves, hopefully, within this holistic journey in life.
Well, thank you, Josh. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, Annabelle, and looking forward to seeing your new deck.
Thank you.